So today we're going to talk about homeschooling amidst the chaos. And I posted in the app a picture of a dumpster on fire floating down the street in a flood. That's kind of how sometimes it's felt over the last 20 some years of homeschooling. And I thought, you know what, it's good to have a discussion. I'm fortunate enough to have three people that I respect very much, that I think have experience in homeschooling amidst the chaos. And so I figure let's just talk a little bit about some of their experiences and get a little bit of input from somebody other than me on this topic. Kristen likes to remind me that even though I talk a lot about how much I know about homeschooling, I haven't often done the homeschooling. So I'm a quarterback. I'm an armchair quarterback. I'm really good at homeschooling, just I don't always do it. So anyways, let's go around and introduce yourselves and just a little bit about the chaos that you do have in your life as well. Kristen?
Well, I'm Kristen Pratt. I am married to Randy. I am the author of the Language Lessons for Living Education series, and I also work from home for Masterbooks, although I have worked from home quite a bit through the years, and also homeschooled. And I've also gone through a year and 3 months of cancer treatment for breast cancer. And life gets pretty chaotic sometimes. So yeah, lots of chaos. Even coming this past year, it's been a year since my last treatment. It's like I'm catching up, and I just keep thinking, when is it going to slow down just a little bit, just a little bit?
Now, at one point in our lives, the chaos, I'm going to just introduce the chaos because this is the perspective we're coming from. We had 9 kids. We were homeschooling 6 of the kids, I think, at one time.
Yeah,
we
actively.
had 4 boys ages 4 and under with the special needs, right? And we had a business that was in our house, and we were doing ministry. And yeah, it was like all the plates were spinning, and then some started to fall. And I can remember even just some of our philosophies for homeschooling amidst chaos came out of that crazy season where I actually spent my birthday in a hospital with one of the kids who had a bad bug. So, okay, Jessica.
I'm Jessica McCullough. I am the author of Where Faith Grows. I also work for Masterbooks from home. I have worked from home for the last 10 years. I think I had like a 6-month break where I didn't work in that period of time, but that's it. And we have 4 kids in our home. We have made 2 pretty big moves, 600-mile moves while homeschooling, and working through that entire time. That's one of the perks of working from home. You get to work from home no matter where you live, but then you keep working and you don't get a break. And my husband works in the trades, and so he is always super busy, never without lots of work to do. Yeah, but that's pretty much, we're always typically, while we are not in full-time paid ministry, we are always pretty heavily involved in some form of ministry. Our home often has a revolving door with lots of people coming in and out. So that's our life.
Miss Amy, how about you?
I am Amy Scott, and I also work for Masterbooks from home on the app as a moderator and coach there. And I have 4 kiddos as well that are all pretty little still. So we're kind of in the chaos of the small children age time frame. And then I also am on the board for a local homeschool co-op that we're doing this year. And when COVID happened, I started a homeschool field trip group for all of the people that kind of got thrown into homeschooling. So the last couple of years has had a lot more going on in my life. I thought that maybe getting into homeschooling, we'd have less to do, and we've definitely had more to do. So yeah, it's been pretty crazy. And us too, we are very much entertainers. Our house is pretty much always full, and we love it that way. And yeah, it's just always busy, a lot going on. My husband owns a business, and so he's in the trades as well and is unbelievably busy. And so, yeah, we have plenty of chaos here. Oh, and our children, to top it all off, are very spirited, is what I like to call them. They are wild and free. So,
Yeah, I wouldn't say ours were ever really tame either. There was always somebody visiting recently said, you kind of play. I asked about our family, and you don't realize, but they were kind of like, well, you guys kind of just play really rough, and there's just a lot of commotion, right?
There's a lot of numbers. There's a lot of people. This can be very overwhelming.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for us, people never really believe that we homeschool because they have that mindset of like, oh, the quiet, calm little homeschool kids, and just from the, I guess, I don't know, the old school, whatever stereotypes, and then they meet our kids and they're like, what? No, I'm like, yeah, they're crazy and very social.
Well, Amy, what would you say as far as homeschooling in the chaos? What would you say is your biggest challenge? Like, what is the thing that you just wrestle the most?
Probably just general time management. Because you can get so busy with all the things, and all the things are good things, right? So we get caught up in like, oh, we're involved in this with ministry, and we're involved with this with church, and we're involved with this with our homeschool group, and we're involved, and they're all, and the kids want to do XYZ sport or whatever. And all the things sound so cool and so fun. And it's just figuring out how to manage it all and how to kind of get away from the FOMO perspective and just realize that it's okay to not do everything all the time, right? I think a couple of years ago, we kind of adopted this season of no, where it was just okay to say no to stuff. And now my kids are getting a little bit older. Our youngest is 3. So we do have a little more freedom now, but there was a time, I had 4 kids in 4.5 years. So there was a time where I had 3 in diapers and little newborn baby, and we were building a house, and we had a lot going on. And there was a time where it was just like, okay, we need to say no in this season, and that's okay. And I think that people need to be encouraged in that we're not disobeying God if we're in a season of just saying, I can't do that right now. I think we think, oh, but it's ministry, or it's, such good things. And so we just have to be careful with recognizing that the burnout on us can be so real, and then we're not able to do anything well, right? It's recognizing this perspective of we can do a couple things really, really well, or we can do all the things and it's just kind of blah. So I think finding the line of that, and it's different for different people. Some people can, I only have 4 kids, which in the homeschooling world is kind of small family. But for us, it's like, okay, that's about what I can manage. And, and then I have some friends that have 10 kids, and they're just in all the things, but that works for them. So yeah, I think just recognizing kind of your personal baseline on what makes sense for you to where you're thriving versus surviving. And so I've had to kind of ask myself those questions sometimes. Am I thriving right now, or am I just barely surviving? And then I can know how to manage a little better based on that.
Yeah, that's good. Now, Jessica, you're kind of in the middle. You're kind of out of the diaper phase, right? And in the middle phase of upper elementary and elementary to junior high. What would you say is your biggest challenge in homeschooling amidst the chaos?
So I think because my kids are at this age now where I'm a little bit less hands-on, still hands-on with my youngest, but I have to kind of watch myself, because I feel like if I'm not careful, he misses out, because I can easily like disconnect, because my 12-year-old doesn't need me, sitting next to him all day long. And so I can go through the day and just kind of like, hey, I'm busy. I have to hit on these things. And I just kind of can push the 6-year-old off and just be like, well, I can do that later, or his school doesn't take that long, so I'll just, push it off for now. So I think my biggest struggle is just making each child's education a priority in whatever season they're in. So the 12-year-old is really easy, right? Because he does it by himself and I just have to check it. And so it's not that big of a deal. But sometimes I have to like look at them all and say, okay, well, whatever each one needs, I have to be there to meet that individual child's need instead of trying to bring my agenda first and then kind of fit them in. I kind of have to look at their needs, and then my agenda needs to fit in around that. Those extra things that I'm doing, they have to fit in around. And just like what Amy said, sometimes I have to say no to things. I have to say, no, this doesn't work because, my 6-year-old is going to need me at that time. So I think I'm not in like where Amy is at with the little ones and quite the same craziness. And, actually, my husband and I just left our kids at home for the first time ever for like a few minutes and ran to the store the other day. And it was so weird. But it was the first time we had ever done that. And like, we're just kind of in a different season, but there's still those challenges in that season. And I have to make sure that the younger ones don't fall behind because I'm like ready to move on with the older ones.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And so Kristen, now you're at the other end. You've graduated 5, and now as of this week, right, all of our kids are, I don't know how old he's turning.
All but one is in high school.
Yes.
I got 7th grade and up.
So what would you say is your biggest?
I'm kind of coming into the season where I was actually looking forward to school starting, because my boys now, when we're not all together in the schoolroom and doing school, they're off just doing the stuff that interests them. And so I don't get to spend a lot of time seeing them when we're not actively doing school. So I told them I was looking forward to starting school. This year's been a little bit different. We don't usually start this early. We usually wait till after Labor Day. We follow a northern schedule, and that's just what's been our pattern for so many years, because most of our homeschooling was done in New York, and that was the schedule that was followed there. So we did a soft start this year, and we're just kind of easing into it a little bit because our schedule this fall is going to be kind of a crazy one. And so we needed to start just a little bit earlier to make up for some of the time we're going to be taking off. And that's part, I think, of managing the chaos, is just kind of looking ahead, knowing the family that you have right now, what the season is, and planning accordingly. And so for us, I could see ahead to this season that's going to have, it's all good stuff, but we're going to have to take some chunks of time off, not just a day here and a day there. And so I just haven't had a chance to get everything prepared. And the kids really weren't ready to jump in and say, okay, this is the day we're starting, and we're just going to jump in like we normally do. So I think that that's a really key component in the chaos, is being able to look ahead as much as you can. You can't see some of the bigger issues that come up. You can't see the death of a family member. You can't see COVID. None of us saw that coming. There's a lot of things that you just can't. Cancer. There's a lot of things that you don't see coming. But those that you do, just preparing for the best you can ahead of time. And so that's what I've done. So again, we've had this soft start, And it just feels good to be with my boys. And, it's just those little communications and little jokes and little things that you do throughout the day that just make life special. And I also understand how fast time actually goes. I know that, we still have 4 at home, and that might seem like, a lot to a lot of people. But for me, that's a huge downsize. I've been used to managing a lot at home, and but I've never been in this place where they've all been older, very self-sufficient. I've always had somebody that was very dependent. And so it's just a different kind of a season, and I'm trying to enjoy it. I think my biggest challenge is, as you're like Jessica mentioned, as the kids get older and more independent, other things come in and fill in that time real easy and real quick. And so it's remembering to just stop and purposely spending time with them, connecting with them. Because if you don't, that time is just gonna go so fast. And before I know it, all my kids are gonna be grown. And so that's my challenge that I've made to myself, that as we get going in the school year, to be sure to purposely take time to spend with my boys and connect with them.
Yeah, it's good. I don't necessarily sit at the table or in the schoolroom on an everyday basis, but as a parent, I do notice something kind of along the lines like Jessica said. The oldest, when you're raising a family, the oldest kind of sets the pace. And everybody else keeps on. You keep up. Put them in a baby stroller, strap them up, let's go. And then your kids begin to graduate and move into life. And now we have, our oldest is almost 30 or 30. She 30? She's 30 something. 30.
31.
She's 30.
She's 31.
Yeah. I never knew their ages ever. Anyways, I don't even know mine. But so anyways, she's 30 years old. And so what I've noticed is I'm having to rewind, because I feel like my 12-year-old and my 14-year-old and my 16-year-old, we're like, our whole family has just moved into this next phase, and they're not getting the richness from me that my oldest got when they were a teen. And so while they have new experiences and new things, I kind of miss being present at that level. So the chaos gets worse when your children become adults, because their crises are bigger. It's not a stub toe. It's trips to the emergency room. It's heartbreaks. It's different things that take a lot more energy than, oh, let me kiss it and make it better type stuff. So the chaos actually, I don't think has stopped. If anything, it's fuller. My phone goes off all the time. And a lot of times it's my adult children that are needing to get advice or do something. So chaos happens, and it's never going to stop. And that's the beauty of parenting and families. We signed up for this. Vicki asked how to get back after a crisis. Something all of you mentioned was the word seasons. I love that word, because seasons remind us that there's a beginning and an end, and we move into a new season. Life has seasons. Parenting has seasons. Relationships have seasons. Like there's just seasons give us transitions. How good are you? Anyone can speak to this, but how good are you, do you think, at recognizing, oh, this is a season. I was prepared for spring, but now we're in summer. So now I need to take the coat off. I need to change my shoes. It's time to put on shorts. And then all of a sudden, wait, it's getting kind of nippy. How easy do you transition? Or do you continue, are you in the middle of December in Michigan still trying to wear flip-flops?
Go ahead, Amy, grab that one.
Tag,
you're it.
Yeah, so I think, with little ones, it's kind of easy to tell what they need, right? Okay, you're cranky and you're whiny, and so we're not going to do this today, right? So it's very obvious on small little things. And I think ultimately just always being flexible, especially when kids are small. We've kind of, for me personally, I would love every day to follow this perfect plan that, we wake up and we have breakfast and then we sit and have our devotions together. It's this sweet little detailed schedule that we like to go through, and we follow the happy planner, whatever things, right? And then reality hits and it's like, yeah, no, we really can't just throw all of that away. It's kind of like when you go to have a baby and you give the nurse, it's your first child, and you give the nurses your birth plan and they just kind of look at it and laugh with each other and you're like, what? And so that's pretty much how it goes with homeschooling too. I mean, there's just times where your plan isn't going to happen. And so when you're entering into a time or a season where what you had planned maybe isn't going to quite work, that's okay, right? And I think we can get bent out of shape about those things, or feel like we're failing, or feel like maybe what we're doing isn't enough, or, some of those questions start to come in, and Satan will kind of work his way in there and get to you that, well, what are you doing wrong or whatever? And I think that we just have to realize that, what, our expectations maybe are just a little too high right now. And it's okay to bring them down a little bit. And for people like me that are type A personalities and like things to be in order, that is very hard to do. I've really had to kind of take a step back and realize, again, like this is where we're at with lots of littles, that the expectations can't be what they would be for a bunch of teenagers, right? They are what they are for a bunch of little kids. And so I think just recognizing the type of children that you have even. I mean, if you've got children that are special needs, that's going to look different than if you have a child that isn't. And so, yeah, I think our culture has everything so particular, right? Like, this is what it's supposed to look like when it comes to anything. And we just have to get away from that and say, you know what? It's going to look like what's going to look like for our family, and that's okay. So,
no, for us, there were a lot of expectations on what a family was supposed to look like, and how we were supposed to parent, and the things that we were supposed to do. And it was very hard coming to a place where we could accept disappointing others to be true to our family. And we found that even in relationships, our family, when you have a large family, 4 kids, 9 kids, 6 kids, 5 kids, 2 kids, sometimes you outgrow relationships. And that was difficult. And then even in homeschooling, it was difficult when we outgrew relationships with public school families. And that disappointing others creates a lot of anxiety. So Jessica, what would you say to a mom who's kind of in that place where there's like this tension going on of, we're outgrowing this family because they're kind of choosing different things than what we would choose. And yet there's all these expectations. When I come to church on Sunday, my kids are supposed to look picture perfect. We're lucky to get out the door, and maybe we even forget one of the kids, right? Like, that's just life. What would you say to that mom who's kind of in that place where it's like, I can't keep all this going, but I'm going to start disappointing those people like parents and mother-in-laws and all of that?
Well, I think a big part of it is focusing on what matters. So especially if you are a people pleaser, which is something that I have kind of struggled with in my life at certain times, I think prayer is a big thing when it comes to this, because when I have a situation where I can say, hey, I've let this person down. And when I let somebody down, it's like, I take it personally, like it's something that really, really hits me hard. Then I can go to pray. I can go in prayer to God and I can talk to him about it. And I can say, okay, well, is this expectation that this person had for me? Is this an expectation that you have for me, God? Because there's times, there's godly people in our lives, and there's times when we let people down and we've messed up. So there's times where we need to evaluate and go, okay, I did something wrong here. I need to, make amends, or I need to change something. But there's plenty of times in our lives when someone has expectations for us and they have nothing to do with biblical expectations. They are their own expectations that they want to place on everybody around them, or specifically on you, but it has nothing to do with the word of God. It has nothing to do with your own relationship with God. And so ultimately, for me, what I've had to do so many times is I've had to go in prayer to God, and I've had to say, okay, God, I'm going to put my pride down right now, because my desire to please everyone around me is really rooted in pride, that I want them to always be happy with me. And so I need to lay down my pride, and I need to say, okay, God, please show me, what expectations should I have? And if this person has expectations for me that are not your expectations, I have to lay it down and I have to surrender it to God. And I don't know if there's really like a super easy step system in order to do this, other than just taking it to God and going to him, and then saying at the end of the day, I want to live a life that's pleasing to God. And so what does that look like? Sometimes that means that I have to work at relationships that are around me, even if I don't agree with the person, right? We have to lay down our desires sometimes. But there's plenty of times when people have expectations of us that we don't need to go with whatever they say. But it's a very, like, there's not really a point blank answer. And that's why it's just going to God and asking him, what do you have for me to do in this situation? Being very spirit led. And then also, outside of prayer, also talking to people in your life that have godly wisdom, who maybe are outside of the situation. Maybe they don't have, something invested into the topic that you're discussing. So if there's a confrontation, maybe with family, go to somebody who's not part of your family to talk with them about it, and get real information and say, am I out of line here? Or do I need to make a change? Or, are they expecting too much of me? And be humble in the process, because sometimes we need to be told that we're wrong. So we need to be willing to hear that at times. And then there's other times when, somebody can say, no, you have a right to have boundaries. They have crossed those boundaries, and it's okay for you to say no to them. But there's not, it's so dependent on the situation. It's so dependent on who you're talking about. That's why it's really being spirit led.
Yeah, I agree. I think sometimes we have to purposely do an evaluation where we step back and say, what am I doing today that isn't really helping? Like, are there things today that I'm doing that aren't required of me, or that just aren't helping? And then what should I be doing to be bringing order and just enjoying where the Lord has me? Because if we don't do that, we can just kind of get stuck in these patterns where it's chaos is the habit, it's the norm. And we almost become like that. The family becomes the normal for the family. So Kristen, as we're talking about some of this with people's expectations, and then society has expectations, when we were growing up, kind of the big push for our generation, and I think it's continued, was you're going to go to college, you're going to have a career, you're going to do all these super things. And being that, you're married to me, that's part of your chaos. And then because I'm kind of a superhero, you feel the pressure to keep up. I'm joking. But how I know how it was, because there were people that had expectations on you, and you knew what the Lord had called you to, but yet you were laying down some pretty big opportunities that the Lord had given you. And over all this time now, you're 30 years of this. What do you have to a mom who's beginning to feel like, how do you not lose yourself? How do you not stay kind of true to yourself? And yet in the middle of the chaos, when, we have all these office chairs. I think we finally got rid of the last office chair from our business. And almost all of them have like baby snot down the side of them where you just can't get it off, no matter, the formula that sticks in the crevices, because the chaos was insane of what was going on. So what would you say about not losing yourself in homeschooling, chaos, being a mom, being a wife, doing, all of that?
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack right there. So yeah, as I'm thinking, as everybody's talking, I've got all these things and all these moments in time going through my mind, decisions that we've made, and times when we've completely gone against the pressures. And those are hard. It's really hard to do when you know what the Lord is calling you to and you step aside. And there's so many different moments that were really big moments that we had to make decisions. And I can look back now and see where the Lord was directing us and how much of an impact it was going to make on our future. But we didn't know that then. And it's everything from choices of curriculum. I remember there was so much pressure that I was to use one specific curriculum and one specific curriculum only. Well, that just didn't meet the needs of my kids. And, one thing that Randy and I have always said to each other is on Judgment Day, we're the ones who have to answer for how we raised our children and our obedience to him. And so ultimately that becomes the big question: who is going to stand before God? And it's going to be us, not these other people that are pressuring us to do X, Y, Z with our kids. And so that's something that I would definitely say is remind yourself that you are the parents, you are the ones who are accountable directly to the Lord for the decisions that you make. And so, that sometimes is enough to give you the courage to say, no, this is what the Lord has called us to do in this situation. And you can be loving and you can be kind, but you can also stand firm in those decisions. And I'm so glad that we did in so many of these decisions, because, fast forward to now, I can look back and see the biggest regrets that we do have are the ones that we didn't go and we caved to the peer pressure. We can think back of some times when we wish we had made a different decision. Thankfully, none of them were catastrophic, but we still had consequences coming from them. And so, those are things that I wish we could go back and do over, but we've learned from them. What would you asked? There was so much in this unpacking. I'm trying to think. What was the last question you asked?
Do not lose yourself in the chaos.
Oh, losing yourself. So I found personally for me, it was hardest when I was the mom of littles not to lose myself, because the demands, the physical demands, the lack of sleep, and the difficulty to have any kind of a break, being a nursing mom, but even if you're not nursing, it's just so demanding. And then having, even after they're out of that baby stage, you're tying everyone's shoes, you're getting everyone dressed. There's just so many demands and it's just exhausting. And so, there were times that I would just lock myself in the bathroom when Randy was home to take care of the kids, take a bath, read a book, just do something that I could just spend a little bit of time to pray and be, just have a little bit of separation. And I do remember there was one particular time when I had a lot of little kids, and including a baby, and we were running a business, and I was newly pregnant, and my pregnancies weren't particularly easy, and I was very sick for about 4 months. And I was just still doing all the things. And I came to the point that I was just exhausted, to the point that all I could do was just go to bed. I just laid down. And I just felt like I was really letting down the Lord, because I couldn't pray. I couldn't read the Bible. I couldn't, help all the people I wanted to help. I couldn't be there enough for the kids. It's just like, that was one of those moments that the plates were just falling down rapidly. And I had kept my Bible in an open place, just so that when I had a moment that I was passing by, I could at least glance at it. And it was open to the story of Martha and Mary. And I do tend to be the Martha rather than Mary. And I do struggle with that. And I looked at it, the words just leapt out at me about, that's all that's required. And so I was laying there after I had looked at that. I went to bed, and the Lord just started speaking to me that as I was laying there, just using those few moments I just felt like I was just laying at his feet exhausted. And he was just reminding me that's all that's required. Like you're already doing everything, and it's okay. You can lay down and just exist, And so I have always remembered that sometimes what I think the Lord is requiring is far many more plates being spun than what he's requiring, that just sometimes to simply rest. And that was a really hard season when I had so many demands of the littles. But even now, every single season has so much that's just pulling at us, that it's okay to just take time to rest. In fact, we need to just take time and rest. And I think that one day we'll be surprised at how much we did that wasn't required of us. And how stressed we got over things that weren't required of us.
Yeah. If I could add a little bit, because I know the story well, but I think, as you're reading a book, anyone that's reading a book can't tell you what the book is about when they're only partway through the book, right? You have to continue reading the whole story to understand the book. Our lives are very much that way, and we have to trust a little bit. We have to be willing to let divine providence play out. And when we're in a story, it may be tragic on a couple of pages, like what Vicky has gone through, where tragedy has struck a family and they're going through pain. And sometimes the only thing you can do is to turn the page and keep reading, because life continues to go on and there are more seasons and all of that. And when we come to the end of the book, that's where we realize that a very good God was guiding all of the events of our life and was working things together for our good. If you had taken, Kristen, the path that others had predetermined, I don't believe that the richness that you've experienced in life, it would have been anything like what God has done in your life. And so to take those dreams and those goals and ideals and lay them at the altar and be willing to let the Lord take them and replace them with what he had intended for you. And now, I said I was going to try to make you guys cry. Now I'm going to cry. I said, to know that like the Lord brought you to this place through all of these things, and then gives you the opportunity to write a curriculum, but also, the impact that all these kids that were doing the curriculum had praying for you, and the connection that you had. And just knowing that God did something like, today, this is incredible to be able to connect with so many people who are doing such a tremendous work that is going to impact the world. So I think God really, his story, we can trust him. And don't you think that today anxiety is one of the key words that everybody is talking about? The younger generation a lot is saying, we're having anxiety. There's all this anxiety. Anxiety, I think, comes from the fact that we don't truly believe God is good. And so we don't trust him, that I just can't trust that what I'm seeing in the world. I can't trust that if I get COVID and die, if that happens, I can't trust that he's good and he'll take care of my family. But I know better. I know that all things he does, he's good God and takes care of things. And so in the midst of all the chaos, my encouragement would absolutely be that we don't always have to have an answer. The house isn't always going to be perfect. I remember when Kristen came to the place where she could no longer scrub corners with toothbrushes anymore because the kids were outpacing her in mess and she couldn't keep up. We had to move to we were lucky, could we keep the broom going? Right?
Yeah, I was a little bit of a perfectionist. I always laugh and say, I'm a perfectionist. I love it quiet. I love everything hyper organized. And, God just knew what I needed. It took 9 kids to break me and mold me. It's like the clay, it's the 9 kids that is stacked on top of that clay, smushing it down. And, so that God could mold me into what he wanted me to be. And it's pretty neat. I wanted to just speak real quick to Vicky in more practical terms. So Vicky wants to know how to get back to it after a crisis. Well, first of all, life just shuts down in the crisis, and that's okay. When my dad passed away, life came crashing to a halt. I got a call that he was very ill. My sisters and I planned very rushed plans with no time to even prepare the family. We were gone, and then out of state, and then my family, he passed, and my family all joined us where I was, and that was just a really rough season. And when we got back home, we all had to take a little bit to kind of get ourselves settled and do practical things like laundry and get food in the house, throw out the stuff that had rotted while all this was happening. And, it just takes that little bit, and you have to give yourself time for those practical things on top of the emotional toll. And so there has to be time that you just take out to cry. And sometimes you just sit there and you cry in the middle of it. I'm sure my kids have wondered at times, why is mom all teary-eyed? But something reminded me of my dad, and that's okay. And then what I would say is it's also okay to focus on just the essentials. I would suggest math and language arts is what you add back into the schedule first, and then your social studies and your science, and then after that, the electives. So it's okay to take that gradual approach back into life as everybody is able. And that's going to look a little bit different for each family, depending on the ages of their children, the circumstances of the death or the crisis. But allow yourself to move back into it gradually, and know that, this year you might not finish all the books, and that's okay.
And I think homeschooling is more than books, right? So when we grieve, we're with our children, we're teaching them how to grieve the loss and when things don't meet expectations. And so you're still, even though you feel the pressure to be back in books, and we know we have to do that because it's required, but at the same time, you can give yourself a little bit of permission to be like, we're still all learning together. This is part of helping our kids understand that in life there will be loss because we live in a fallen and a sinful world. And until the return of Christ, we won't, we're not in a place yet where every tear is wiped away. And so we teach our kids through that process.
Yeah. And to me, it's probably an even more important learning time than what they're going to learn in their books, because really we have a chance to discuss the goodness of God and how we can grieve, but we don't grieve the same that the world grieves. And we can just share that and teach them how to cope.
Yeah. And to also understand that there's this life is a vapor, right? That all of us are appointed, like death isn't something we necessarily like to talk about, but it is a big part of life. And I think that's part of homeschooling that we can use opportunities with as well. Okay, so I'm going to make a transition because we've talked a lot about kind of bigger things, but Faith is asking about a student being able to begin working on his own. I want to talk a little bit about masterbooks, because masterbooks, I say all the time, masterbooks is homeschooling for the real world. There's the homeschools we wish we had, like Amy said, that are picture perfect, and we had breakfast, devotions, a sweet kiss on the way as dad went out to work, and then we all sit and do our work. We're all, A+ students and got our work done, and everybody loves everybody, and all of those things. But that's not always the way life works. So masterbooks has margin, right, and capacity. Kristen, we'll start with you. As far as the masterbooks method working for the real world, what, especially like Faith, their transition, it's kind of, I don't know how to ask this question. There's masterbooks has this, we have this expectation, and then we have the real world homeschooling. And then how do they bridge that? And how does masterbooks help a parent kind of bridge that gap there? And then Jessica, I'm going to transition to you because you've experienced homeschooling with a traditional school type curriculum, and that was much more rigid, that didn't allow for that transition as much. So we'll start Kristen and then to Jessica.
Okay. Not sure exactly everything you asked. You asked lots of different questions at once. And
no, I expect you to keep up with me. There, you guys got to keep up.
Yeah. I've always struggled with that.
Everybody typically does.
So, Faith is asking about her 12 and her 10-year-old and how to get the 12-year-old to be more independent and how to manage both of them at the same time. And that can be really difficult. Every student is different. They all have different needs, different approaches, different personalities. And there's always going to be an area with each student that they're working on. And so, you can utilize punishment for things, but that doesn't tend to work as well when it comes to school enthusiasm. And so, we tend to reserve outright sinful things for anything that's going to take more of a punishment kind of a tone. So I would, in this kind of a situation, prefer to use some sort of incentive. And so there's a lot of things that you can do. You can set a timer and you can say, okay, I want you to read the directions and I want you to try to figure it out for 5 minutes. Set the timer. When that 5 minutes is up, then I'll help you with it. You can, give some sort of a chart that's checked off that every time that he's able to get through a homeschool morning without, having to have you right next to him, he can check something off and there's some sort of a reward when it's full. There's a lot of different creative things that you can do to help a student be more independent. But I am going to say, for the student that tends to like that constant affirmation with you right there, it's a process. Even at 12 years old, it can be a process to get them weaned off of that. And so I would put a long-term goal versus a short-term goal, that you work together, keep the communication going, saying, this is what we've got to work at. This is what I want you to do. But it also scheduling. There's nothing wrong with your solution of working with the 10-year-old first, then working with the 12-year-old. I'm always trying to, work through that process. And, sometimes I just have to tell one of the kids, hey, I have to devote my time to this one right now. When I'm done, then you'll have your turn. And some of that is really important because they're learning how to work in the workplace. they're not always going to be able to just barge into somebody's office and get done what they need done. They have to figure out ways to occupy themselves and do what they need to get done while they're waiting. And so these are real teachable moments. And so that's how I would answer that particular question. But it is a lot to manage. But I do think, I know I helped build the master book processes. And so that schedule that's at the beginning of the book, even though everybody has a different schedule, you can still use it. Your student can have a copy of that schedule. I would highly recommend the student, even if you make copies of it, one for them, one for you, let them have the schedule. Let them see this is what we're doing. My students, that's what they do. They follow the schedule. I don't tell them what they need to do. And so giving the student those tools to start directing their own day, knowing what they need to do. And that's what Master Books tries to do, is it gives the parent and the student the tools that they need. And we want them to become more independent. We want them to take on the responsibility for their own education. I just had that conversation with one of my kids that was giving, a little bit of grief. And, one of them was trying to get through it as quickly as possible and not really absorb it and not really doing it to gain the knowledge, but just to check off the box. And, I had the conversation of, you can do it that way, but you're going to miss out on a better education. And that's your education, not my education. And so I think having some of these discussions with your students is important versus just here, go do this and be done with it.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. I think the shorter lessons too.
Yes.
When you have a season that's rough, like what Vicky's going through, a page or two in math a day is so much easier than 5 or 6 pages in math a day. And so the shorter lessons is definitely one. Being able to do applied learning, because sometimes you need to just get out. So to be able to say, today we're just going to go take a trip to the zoo, and there's still plenty that we're going to do that we're still going to get information in that type of thing. The creativity there helps a lot as well. All right, Jessica. So the Master Books method versus more of the traditional school type method, and what would be your, how would you compare the two?
I don't know if I really understand what I'm answering.
Compare the Master Books method with the traditional curriculum that was more designed for a school.
I mean, I think the biggest thing is that when you're using curriculum that was designed for a school, you're using curriculum that is expecting somebody at the front of the room, or even in a homeschool setting, sitting at the table with the student, doing essentially everything. Now, with many of those types of curriculum, you have like lessons where you're sitting there and doing them together. And then you also have seat work where they're working on their own. But the thing about Master Books is that it kind of melds the two together. So the lesson and the work that goes with that are all being done together, but neither of them require someone to be at the front of the room or necessarily sitting with your child. If your child's old enough to be reading independently and has the maturity to do so and is comfortable emotionally to sit there and do the work on their own, the curriculum is written in a way that is totally possible. But with curriculum that was designed for a classroom, you would have to give the student the teacher manual, because there's text in there that the teacher would be expected to say. I know, like when I was homeschooled, there weren't as many options back when I was in school. So part of that was we were often using some classroom type material, and I was using that, and my mom used it in a way that was more independent, but I had to skip assignments a lot of times, or my mom would look with me and she'd be like, I can't find any of this information anywhere. And like now when I look back at it, I realize because it was all in the teacher manual, but my mom didn't buy it because she didn't want to do that type of school with us. So we were kind of adapting classroom type material in a more independent way. But then it became frustrating as the student. And even like for my mom, it became frustrating for her sometimes because it was like, well, how can they ask you a question and they don't give you the information? Or how can they expect you to do something when they didn't explain it fully? So that's a really major difference. I think that's like the big one to me, because I experienced using those types of curriculum as a student and then also using them even as a parent. And so we had to like, just even with my kids in early elementary, I had to like say, skip it. Like, I'm not sitting down with you every day. I mean, if you have more than one kid, how can you do that? It's just not possible. And then I went through like this guilt trip when I would look at their school and plan it out. And I'd go, I can do this. I can sit down. Yeah. It's not going to take me that long, or I can make them, I can fit all this extra stuff in. And then a couple of days into it, you're saying, no, we're not doing this. No, we're not doing that. No, we're not doing this. And then you end up feeling guilty because you feel like you're not giving your kids the best education they can have. So, I mean, those are like the big things that kind of stand out to me, where masterbooks is just designed to be easily usable. I can just open up the book. And even in regards to, like, we were talking about dealing with crises, like sometimes, like where Kristen talked about, it's okay to take a step back and just go, okay, we're not doing anything for a while, or we're only doing one thing right now, or whatever. There's also sometimes where it's like, we're walking through this crisis and I need some semblance of normal in my life. And so we're going to continue doing every book. And, last year I lost a baby. And that was something that we did in the process where I just said, we're going to continue. And I didn't have to sit there with my kids every day, but yet they could open up the books and they knew what to do. But if we were using curriculum that was for a classroom, no way. We couldn't have made it through. Our life would have been put completely on pause for as long as it took me to get to a healthy place.
That's good.
And then once you did come to that healthy place, there's all the extra activities that you can add in if you want to. And that's one of the things that I really like about masterbooks as well, is that we haven't built in the more complex type activities as part as what you have to do. Your child can still get a really good education if they're just doing the basics. But if you're in a season where life is good, there's no crises, there's nothing going on, and you want to dive deeper, then you don't have to try to figure out activities. We have ideas that you can springboard from in a lot of our curriculum and take that curriculum farther, especially if a kid is particularly interested in a topic and wants to.
Yeah. It's good. I've done now Facebook Lives and live streams for 4 years with masterbooks. I've cried a lot of tears as I've talked. Part of it just, we serve such a special audience, but we all go through struggles, and they're common. And the struggles that we've gone through with breast cancer, or just all of the struggles that we go through right now, I'm pretty sure that out of the many thousands of families that masterbooks serves, there's other people that are being ministered to. And sometimes that passion and vulnerability is hard, but the Lord is using all of this to help somebody who's just sitting there saying, I'm ready to put my kids back in public school today because it's crazy. I've lost myself. My kids, I can't even make sure that they're brushing their teeth. Everybody thinks I'm losing my sanity. And you feel like, because that's what you're experiencing today, that's what the rest of your life is going to look like. Amy said at the beginning, you were building a house, you had 4 really littles, and you just had to come to that place where you said it's a season, but that's not what your life looks like today. You've moved into a new season. Jessica, while you're grieving and going through that season, that was tough. And then that season changes and begins to move into a new season. And Kristen, with breast cancer, it was the same. Like, chemo was tough and our whole family had to rally different than we do today. And now we're transitioning, and that's a whole new process of coming back into, how do we set up family now? Because our family dynamic changed while you were out. Right. And so all of that is difficult. Amy, I like to say curriculum is a tool and you're the carpenter. And a lot of times we get it backwards and we think that we're the tool and curriculum is a carpenter. I know that you give yourself permission to adapt and adjust. Can you speak to that for mom who maybe feels a little bit of that tension of, I have this book, I need to do every single problem, every single page. I need to do it like I see other moms doing it.
Yeah, for us, we are very much that our book work is part of our homeschooling life, but it is not all of our life at all. It's actually kind of a small part of what I would consider to be my kids' learning experience. And so we are, and each of my kids is a little bit different in this. My oldest, who is incredibly smart, probably advanced type child, is also my one that dislikes the book work the most, even though he's probably the smartest of my kids. And so, and then my now 5-year-old would have sat and done the entire book of Stepping Stones in one day if I let her. Like, she just loves it. She eats it up. So she's all about that. And so recognizing where each kid is at, I think, is part of how you incorporate book work into your homeschooling life. And then also just understanding that our kids are always learning. And especially when they're younger, there's so much research and so much study, and Carrie Bailey talks about this all the time, just the developmental process and how they're learning through play and they're learning in all of these ways. And I think our culture's kind of forgotten that a little bit as they send kids to school earlier and earlier and earlier, and preschool now starts for 2-year-olds and, all of this crazy. And even as parents, we kind of get a little bit on this, like, oh, look what my 3-year-old can do, and again, it's great. But at the same time, it's like, it's okay that we're not throwing textbooks at our children when they're barely walking. And even when they're 4, 5, 6, 7, that they're not spending their entire life in a textbook, but that they're learning as a whole child how to time management, how to share when you're playing with toys, how to take turns, how to be patient while mommy's working with another child in their workbook, whatever. I mean, there's so many life skills that are being taught outside of, let's sit down and learn about 2 + 2 = 4. And I just think that as a culture, we've got this concept of what education looks like because of the way the public schools and even the private schools have done it for all of these years. But there is a shift that's happening, as homeschooling continues to grow. I think more and more people are recognizing that traditional way of drill and kill is really not the way that kids thrive. Yeah, they might learn it to pass a test. I mean, that's how I was. I grew up in a Christian school doing very well-known Christian curriculum that's still used today in Christian schools and for homeschooling. And I mean, I learned all the things to pass the test, but if I was to go take that test right now, I don't know if I'd pass, because it was just memorization for the sake of getting A's. And so I've really, as a parent, kind of taken a step back from that with my kids, at least now while they're small for sure, on rather than everything being we need to do A to get to B, and that's the way it needs to be. We just don't do that. We really try to, yes, it's important to learn 2 + 2 = 4. And yes, that's the answer. But also, how can we incorporate just math, for example, into everyday life? They're they're playing with their Legos and they're counting them out, or they're whatever it might be, all the different things. We're going to go bake cookies in the kitchen, and now we're going to measure the sugar and we're going to measure the flour, and just understanding that the time that's spent in the books is valuable, but it's not the only tool that we have. And thankfully, as homeschoolers, we really have all the tools that we're able to use. And we have, it's kind of lucky for us, I guess, that we have so many more opportunities with our kids to bring these things to life. Versus when they are in books all day long, and then they come home and then they have 3 hours of homework and then they're just exhausted. There's just not as much opportunity to get outside of that and really apply it to life. So yeah, there's the term that's thrown around called unschooling. We're definitely not unschoolers. We do enjoy some rules in our house. But I would say that when it comes to specifically being textbook focused, it's not our only thing that we're doing. And again, masterbooks is perfect for that, because we're not having to spend all day in books. We're able to get our book work done in short amount of times. And honestly, we really don't even always do it every day. I love those schedules for the sake of knowing where I'm at, but I don't follow them to a T. And our kids do fine with that. Sometimes we take a break for a week because we have whatever it might be, and then we jump back in. And I mean, so far our kids have done well with all of that, just because of the way that masterbooks works. And again, when you're applying it to life, they're still learning in those seasons and in those times where you may not be in the book every single day. Yeah. So
I like to think that masterbooks is a bit of a disruptor, that we've come into the market in the last 5 or 6 years and really approached the whole child learning, approached the less is more, but still effective in learning. That's forcing kind of competition to have to evaluate. And Chris and I both think competition is good, because competition forces us to have to be innovators, and it forces us to continually look to do the right thing. So, all right, so we've got to close up. So what I'm going to do, if I can, is have each of you, just for a mom who's out there today in the middle of chaos, probably in the middle of so many things that got to happen, and she's ready to quit. She's ready to put her kids back in school and throw in the towel. What is your elevator pitch to encourage her to stay the course? Kristen?
Oh, I think I would just say, hey, meet me for coffee and let's talk. And I would just remind her, why did you start homeschooling in the first place? Write that out and remember the wins along the way. Sit down and write out, these are the things that we accomplished. And then take the things that are just really wearing you out and take them to the Lord. Ask him to give you strength and to give you wisdom on how to move forward, and look beyond today. Look to your big goals. Look to scripture. What does scripture say about what you're doing and why you're doing it? And reevaluate what are the things that can be changed. And that's where asking God for wisdom comes in, because when you get sucked in sometimes by life, and sometimes we just need to stop and evaluate where we are, what we're doing, why we're doing it, and also put away the tired old clothes of yesterday. Sometimes what worked then is worn out. We've grown. I have a kid right now. We're not out of summer weather, but he's grown and outgrown his summer clothes. So I've got to put away those clothes, and I've got to go out and buy him some new clothes, and not, think, well, it's still summer and you wore these clothes at the beginning of the year. You can't approach life like that. Sometimes in the most inopportune times, you just need to stop and just reevaluate. everything that's happening and really go before the Lord. And I would encourage you to just know that this isn't forever, and God will give you wisdom. He will strengthen you, and you will see his glory revealed in your family, in your kids' life, even if it doesn't feel like it today. Like Randy said, we only see partway through the book. There's going to be the rest of the book. And when we get to the end, things are going to make sense. And we will be so glad that we persevered.
Great. That's good. Jessica?
Well, when you first asked the question, the first thing that popped into my mind, like the first words were take a step back. And so I think kind of in line with what Kristen was saying, I'm reminded of my youngest was a terrible sleeper when he was born. Like just, he wouldn't sleep through the night. My other ones had all slept through the night really early. And I was always like, oh, God knows that I need my sleep. And this is wonderful. And then I had him and it was terrible. Like, I don't know how else to say that. I remember like when he was 11 months old and still really had never slept through the night. And I was just, I mean, at this point, I've been up every night for over a year because my pregnancies were always rough. And I was to the point where I was just like, I don't like my husband. I don't like my kid. Like, I don't like anybody. I don't like life. This is terrible. And my husband would look at me sometimes and he would say, you're crazy, because there would be times when with my son, I would be like, oh my goodness, I love him so much. And then there would be other times when I'm like, oh, just get him away from me. Like, I can't handle it, you know? And he was breastfed and he wouldn't go to anybody else. And I was just exhausted. And so in those moments, there would be times when I'd be like, I just can't do this anymore. Like, I just give him a bottle, put him on formula. I'm done. Like, I don't care. And my husband would look at me and be like, is that really what you want? You know, is that really what if that's what you want, then, but is that really what you want? And so I would have to take a step back and I'd have to go, no, I'm just tired. You know, that's not what I want. I'm going to regret that decision later on down the road because I'm just tired right now. So I think take a step back. You know, your kids are not going to have anything happen to them if they stop doing school for a week, 2 weeks, a month. Like, in the long-term view of life, if you need to stop school for a month, okay, they're really not going to fall apart. So take some time off and really look for some people that can invest in you, because you matter, not just your kids. You matter. How your health is doing, your mental health, your emotional health, all of that matters. So you need to find people that are pouring into you and helping you to be healthy. So take some time off. I would look into something like the book Education, Does God Have an Opinion? So you can understand, what does the Bible say about education? What does God want for us to do with our children? Because if he has called us to something, he will equip us for it. Now, we can put things in our lives that exhaust us. We can make decisions that make our calling more difficult than it needs to be. But God will always equip us if he's called us to something. So taking that step back and just evaluating what you're doing, giving yourself breathing room, so you can just really look over it all, write down, like what Kristen said, what are the reasons why you're homeschooling? Even when I was homeschooled, there was a few times in my high school years when I told my parents I wanted to go to school. And my parents would say, okay, write down the list of pros and cons for why you want to go back to school. And like, what are the pros and cons for school, for going, you know, to a brick and mortar school, and for being homeschooled. And so I would always go and I'd write this list down, and I would always come back to them and be like, I want to stay homeschooled. And like, as an adult, my mom said to me, she's like, you know, we told you to do that and you were never going back to school. Like, it wasn't an option. You weren't making that choice. But we knew that when you actually took your emotions out of it and just looked at the facts, you would not choose to go back to school, because there were just so many perks to homeschooling. So take the emotions out of it, write down your reasons. But yeah, I think that's the main thing. Take a step back so you can not be so emotional, because being driven by our emotions is not a wise way to live.
Truth. All right, Amy, what would be your advice?
Man, those were so good. You stole them all. No, I'm just kidding. So I love what Jessica said about taking time for yourself and just recognizing that we have seasons where we need help too. And I think we all want to say that we can be super mom and do it all and have all the things done all the time. But it's okay to need help sometimes. And that's, for me, that's something I've learned over the years, especially when I had all of my littles as babies. I don't even now, I still don't love asking for help, but sometimes I just have to, and that's okay. And whether it's friends or family or whatever, or even kids that are older, asking them for help, even though they may not do it the way I would like them to do it, whatever, we just have to recognize that sometimes it's okay that, you know what, mommy really needs help right now. And it's another teachable moment for our kids, that then they're able to see that, first of all, we're not perfect. We need help too. And a time where they see that we lean on God through things. I think one thing that when we get in a time where we're struggling with, maybe it's with homeschooling or something in our family, just having an eternal perspective is something that was said to me years ago. And I'll never forget that. Sometimes our perspective looks at today or tomorrow or next week or right now, living in this COVID world, right? And it's like our eternal perspective, when we look at it that way, first of all, we already know the end of the story. We know God wins. And so that really does help bring a lot of the pressures and the anxiety down when we know that our God is faithful, our God has won the battle, and we're in these little moments right now that matter, that are on the timeline, but the war has been won. And ultimately, when we're thinking about homeschooling our kids and raising our children, they're God's children. They're not ours. And so I often say, how am I being a steward of what God has given me? It's just like with money or with your job or with your spouse or with your home or whatever things that are in your life. You're a steward of those things. And our kids are the same way. They're God's children. We're a steward of them. What does he want us to do with them? And from an eternal perspective, we want our kids with us in heaven, right? Like that is our goal. And so when it comes to the nitty gritty of all the little crazy things and all the chaotic things and the crises and all the things that happen in the world, we really can kind of set all of that aside and just recognize that our one main goal is that our kids learn to love and follow Jesus and join us in heaven. And if nothing else can happen in that moment of your craziness, the one thing that can happen is that you can continue to pray for your kids, to teach your kids about God, to challenge them, to push them towards making a decision to follow God, to love him, to choose him. And when our kids see us doing that and us leaning in on him, that there's nothing more valuable than that. There's no textbook, there's no amount of anything that's going to mean more for our kids than I actually just talked about this with someone that we were discussing in a nice, calm discussion about how kids, whether they're public schooled, homeschooled, Christian schooled, none of those options automatically mean they will become Christians, that they will follow God. There's, we all know that. There's plenty of kids that were Christian schooled their whole life and they don't follow God. Plenty of kids that were public schooled their whole life and they're pastors or whatever, right? The schooling itself matters little in some ways. There's obviously major parts of it, but ultimately it's really about our relationships with our kids and what we are training them day in and day out. And that's why, and from our perspective, we feel like homeschooling is the way to go because it gives us that opportunity every day to fight all the little battles that lead toward our ultimate goal. So I think it's just recognizing that, yeah, there's going to be hard times. It's just life, and that's the earth that we live on. But ultimately, we know the end. So
yeah, that's great. All right, so my wrap up on this is if I were to speak to a mom today who is looking to quit, I would say, number one, just don't, right? We've been at this long enough. We've seen this game long enough to know the fruit. And overwhelmingly, the fruit of homeschooling outweighs the fruit of public schooling. And even more so today. I mean, I just read a manuscript that just blew my mind what public schools, what the teachers are being indoctrinated to teach students this coming year. There are times in history when great people rise to the occasion. And homeschooling is one of those things. Like, it's not easy. It's parenting isn't easy. Serving the Lord isn't easy, right? The apostles, I mean, they ended up, half of them ended up crucified or executed, or, we're just coming to this season where it's so important. And we're investing in a generation, and we're planting seeds that heaven only knows what the future holds. But I trust that the seeds that we're planting will bear fruit. And in the midst of the chaos, in the midst of all the nonsense of messes and everything else, what you're doing today to invest in the future is so important. And you can't give up. You have to press on. It wasn't easy for Moses' mom to put him in the basket and trust the providence of the Lord to preserve her son. Her son came back, delivered the Jewish people from the bondage of Egypt. That's who you are today. The sign behind Kristen's desk that says, perhaps this is the moment you were created for. That's who you are. And that's what today is. And so I wouldn't give up. The chaos will come, the chaos will go. You're going to miss this chaos. Kristen and I, we miss this. I miss stepping on Legos every morning when I come out from the bedroom. Even though I hated it then, I miss it now. But what I don't regret is the investment that we've made into the next generation, and the investment supporting families who are making that same investment. And so I can't encourage you enough. Don't give up. Dig deep, figure it out, dig into the Lord. He says he'll give you wisdom. He says he'll equip us with strength. He'll harden us to difficulties. We need to press into him, but we can't give up the mission. So,
can I add just one thing to all of that?
Absolutely.
And do not deceive yourself that sending them off to school is going to solve your problems. I can attest that is not the case, that you will have different problems, but they won't, most often they're worse problems. So I just want to remind for that mom, that's something too that I would add, that you're not going to solve anything, because usually we're dealing with heart matters, and heart matters can be dealt with at home so much quicker, so much easier.
For sure. For sure. Because when they get older, you realize you don't have that control anymore, and how scary that can be. All right. Well, thank you each for joining me. I know we went long in this. I pray it's a blessing to somebody who gets this, an encouragement to survive the chaos and stay the course. And that's our encouragement. We hope Masterbooks gives you as a tool to help you do that. And I can't thank you each enough for the heart that you have for serving this community and for serving your own children in homeschooling. So thank you. And I appreciate you guys spending time doing this for me. So I will talk to everybody later, and thanks for joining us.